Thank you very much, Minister. Chris Venus from NAB. Just a question around the scope of the governance reforms in superannuation and the fact that it will apply to both retail and industry funds. And while some retail funds like NAB, who are members of the FSC, already have a higher standards, many do not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there are some retail funds that also do not have a minimum of 1/3 independent directors on their board, and that's why we're bringing forward this legislation to make sure that it applies right across the industry so that the highest standards of governance can be expected of retail funds, of corporate funds and of industry funds. Australians increasingly will be reliant on their superannuation for their retirement income, and we have to make sure that we protect that retirement income for those Australians who will need to rely upon it for their retirement years. So having high standards of governance is a foundation stone of that. Making sure that we can deliver that is critical, and we have legislation before the Senate at the moment. As I said before, a very dishonest campaign, I think, has been run against these very basic, sensible, common sense reforms, but we are committed to them. We know that they are in the interests of members, and we'll continue to talk with the crossbench. We'll continue to talk with the major political parties to ensure that we can see their delivery.
Thank you, Minister. David Knox from Mercer. Moving away from governance, but I'd like you to expand a little bit on what you were talking about, retirement income products and the government's plans in terms of releasing the review, but also the timeline for developing SIPPers. Yes. If you could give us a bit more flesh on that.
Yes. So it's really important that people have a number of products that they can choose from, and there have been, as we know, some impediments to people being able to choose a whole variety of different retirement income products. A large part of that has been to do with some of the regulation that has been in place that has limited these products being developed. It has impinged upon innovation in this space. And so when we release the retirement income report in the not too distant future, you can expect the government to also talk about the changes that will be made around that regulation space so that these products can be delivered, which will provide more options to people in their retirement who will be able to tailor their income in retirement to their very, very specific needs. Every Australian is different. Every Australian have their own unique circumstances. We need to be able to have a retirement income system that provides very much for them. And I think that in ensuring that we can have more engagement from those people in their funds, more engagement from them in the products that they choose, they will be able to deliver the retirement income that they're after.
Amanda Banfield from Mondelez. Great to hear of the government's vision for a more agile, creative, dynamic Australia fuelled by innovation and ideas. I wonder if you could speak a little more about the steps that you think we can take now towards that vision.
Well, certainly. I mean, we are very, very keen to encourage businesses to be able to invest in themselves with confidence. The government released at the end of last year our innovation statement that had very specific measures that encourage that sort of investment, that give taxation benefits to those people who are making those investments. Using the taxation system in that way really does allow people to be more creative. It allows them to have the confidence to go forth and make those investment decisions. That's off the back of a number of the other changes that the government has already made. With my small business minister hat on, I am absolutely delighted that during the last budget, the government was able to cut the company tax rate by 1.5% for small business. And for those that are not incorporated, there is a 5% discount for them for unincorporated entities. We also encouraged through that budget as well businesses to be able to invest in specific assets that would help them to grow their business. And we had and continue to have up until the 1st of July 2017, the instant asset write-off for eligible assets up to the value of $20,000. So we've got a number of very specific measures that people can take benefit from in order to be able to make those investment decisions with confidence. But it is true to say that confidence can be quite fragile. And the truth is, when confidence is fragile, when you make changes, you need to make sure that the changes that you make are well thought through, that you have examined them in detail, and that you are not simply putting forward an idea that hasn't been properly tested. I certainly note that the opposition, who are the alternate government, we are in an election year, they have put forward an idea regarding negative gearing that, if implemented, would have a very, very significant impact on our economy. It would have a very, very significant impact in undermining confidence, and it would have a dramatic impact on all Australians. So when we're putting together our taxation policies and plans, we do that very mindful that we want to encourage a more competitive Australia, an Australia that encourages individuals to back themselves, businesses to back themselves, to grow, to employ more people, and to help us to maintain a growing economy that will maintain the very high living standards that we have come to expect. We've had more than 25 years of uninterrupted economic growth. We want that to continue, and you can only do that with prudent and sound economic management.
I have time for one final question down the front. Premier Brumby.
Minister, thank you for your speech today, and thank you for your very strong commitment to superannuation. I guess when we think of superannuation, it's very much about the long term. And when industry super was first, occupational super was first thought about in the early 80s, we're thinking back 30 years ago. And since that time, people's life expectancy on average has increased by pretty close to a decade. It's been very rapid. And so the longevity issue is a very real one. It's a very real one for super funds in terms of longevity risk, and for governments as well. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about how we have a debate in the community about the 9.5%, the 12%, the 15%. You're aware of many of the arguments for and against that. So I'm interested in your thoughts about that. And secondly, related to that, about women in superannuation, because again, you know these numbers very well, but for a whole range of interrelated reasons, women's superannuation balances on retirement are still much, much less than men. So sort of looking long term, try and take the short term out of it. Just interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Look, there are quite a few questions in everything that you've put to me, John, and let's start with women first and foremost. You're absolutely right to identify that women, often through interrupted work patterns, have a much lower retirement income because they have much lower superannuation balances. Often, a lot of those women, particularly on lower incomes, have fairly low balances. Sometimes they can be in multiple funds because they have been put into those funds because they are default funds and they have no choice in those funds. So I think the changes that the government are making to allow those people to be able to choose their fund is absolutely critical. I also note that for people who have low balances, and again, often that is women with those interrupted work patterns, we have seen a clearing away, I suppose, of some of the protections that were once offered to those people when changes were made through My Super. You can see potentially now balances being eroded to zero because there is no amount that is protected within those particular funds. And I suppose there is a very real question as to whether or not that is something that we would want to see continue, or whether we would want to be able to provide some measure of protection, particularly for some of the most vulnerable people in our community, to preserve those funds so it's going to them for their benefit rather than to funds for their benefit through fees and charges. I think you need to have more flexibility. I think that's important when you're considering people who've had interrupted work patterns. Of course, the superannuation sector is not sort of gender specific. We're going to need to be quite creative about some of the ways that we can go about supporting people to be able to build their retirement balances who have got those very specific issues. And you're absolutely right to say that through the intergenerational reports that the government has had now over many years, since the time of Peter Costello when he was Treasurer, we know that people are living longer and they're living more productive lives, and that is in fact a very, very good thing. So allowing our superannuation system to support them and to support them better is absolutely a key focus for the government. There will be no one single silver bullet that will be able to deliver it. It is a series of interconnected reforms that will help them. And as I said earlier in my speech, governance is one very important part of that.
Minister, regrettably, we have to bring this part of our EPO to a conclusion. But can I, on behalf of all of our colleagues here, thank you most sincerely for accepting our invitation. Secondly, for the way in which you have spoken about superannuation from the government's perspective and where you believe it needs to go, and your strong support for governance changes and the other things that you've mentioned. Would you please join me in thanking Minister Kelly O'Dwyer?